Jerusalem, 1119. 9 knights kneel in the shadow of Solomon's temple, their white mantles unmarked by the red cross that would later become their symbol. They call themselves the poor fellow soldiers of Christ, but poverty is the last thing on their minds. What they're about to discover beneath the ancient stones will reshape Christianity forever and ultimately seal their doom. The year is 1307. France erupts in coordinated raids as King Philip IV orders the arrest of every Knight Templar in his kingdom. The charges are heresy, blasphemy, and devil worship. But here's what doesn't add up. These same knights had been the Church's most faithful warriors for nearly 2 centuries. They built cathedrals, protected pilgrims, and died by the thousands defending the Holy Land. So what changed? What did they find that made the Vatican so terrified they had to destroy the most powerful military order in Christendom? The answer lies buried beneath layers of secrecy, ritual, and fear. Because the Templars didn't just guard roads and fight Saracens. They dug, they explored, they uncovered something so dangerous that it threatened the very foundation of Christian doctrine. Something that whispers still echo through history, speaking of doorways that should never be opened and knowledge that was never meant for mortal minds. Tonight, we're going beyond the sanitized histories and official church records. We're diving into the shadows where truth lives alongside terror, where archaeological evidence meets apocalyptic revelation. You'll discover why the most powerful pope in medieval history chose to burn alive hundreds of knights rather than let their secret survive. You'll learn what really happened in those tunnels beneath Jerusalem, and you'll understand why some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. But before we descend into those ancient depths, you need to understand who the Templars really were. Forget the romantic myths of noble crusaders. These men were something far more complex and infinitely more dangerous. The official story goes like this. In 1119, 9 French knights approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem with a humble request. They wanted to protect Christian pilgrims traveling the dangerous roads between the port of Jaffa and the Holy City. The king, grateful for their service, granted them quarters in his palace, which sat atop the ruins of Solomon's temple. For 9 years, these knights supposedly dedicated themselves to highway patrol, keeping bandits at bay. But here's the first crack in the official narrative. 9 knights protecting hundreds of miles of road? It's mathematically impossible. Recent archaeological evidence suggests something far different was happening during those crucial early years. The Templars weren't patrolling roads. They were excavating, digging with systematic precision beneath the Temple Mount, following ancient blueprints that predated Christ himself. What were they looking for? The Ark of the Covenant, perhaps. Lost scrolls containing divine revelation. Maybe the original tablets Moses carried down from Sinai. But excavation records, hidden in Vatican archives for centuries, suggest they found something else entirely. Something that made the Ark look like a child's toy by comparison. The breakthrough came in their 7th year. Workers broke through into a chamber that shouldn't have existed according to any known architectural plans. The air that rushed out carried a smell they couldn't identify. Sweet, metallic, wrong somehow. And from the darkness below came sounds that made seasoned warriors cross themselves and whisper prayers. Brother Geoffrey de Saint-Omer, one of the original 9, kept a private journal during this period. Only fragments survive, hidden away in a monastery library in southern France. His entries from that year grow increasingly erratic. He writes of voices speaking in languages that predate Babel, of symbols carved into stone that seem to shift when viewed directly, of dreams where he walks through corridors that stretch beyond the boundaries of the physical world. But the most disturbing entry, dated 3 days after the chamber's discovery, contains just 5 words in Latin. Ianua inferni, inventa est nos. Hell's door has been found by us, Now, you might dismiss this as medieval superstition. Knights were men of their time, prone to religious hysteria and supernatural explanations for natural phenomena. But here's where the story takes a turn that even skeptics struggle to explain. The Templars' behavior changed dramatically after that 7th year. They emerged from their excavations with knowledge that transformed them from simple soldiers into something approaching sorcerers. Their architectural projects suddenly displayed mathematical precision that wouldn't be seen again until the Renaissance. They built cathedrals using engineering principles that modern scientists struggle to replicate. Their banking system, which laid the foundation for modern finance, employed cryptographic techniques centuries ahead of their time. And their military tactics incorporated strategies that seemed to anticipate enemy movements with supernatural accuracy. Other crusading orders noticed the change. The Hospitallers reported that Templar knights could fight for days without rest, as if drawing strength from some unknown source. Chroniclers described Templar ceremonies that bore little resemblance to Christian worship. Witnesses spoke of chanting in unknown languages, of rituals performed in chambers lit by fires that cast no shadows. The Vatican initially dismissed these reports as jealousy between rival orders. But as the Templars' power grew, so did their independence from papal authority. They answered to no bishop, acknowledged no earthly ruler save the Pope himself, and increasingly they acted as if even that authority was negotiable. Pope Innocent III received the first formal complaints in 1198. A Hospitaller chaplain claimed to have witnessed a Templar ritual where knights prostrated themselves before a carved head that seemed to speak without moving its lips. A Franciscan monk reported finding Templar texts written in scripts that predated known human writing. A Dominican inquisitor discovered evidence of practices that, in his words, mock the very foundations upon which our faith stands. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. In 1244, during the fall of the Cathar fortress at Montségur, Inquisition forces captured several Templar knights, fighting alongside the heretics. Under interrogation, one knight spoke of a covenant sealed in the depths beneath Jerusalem, a pact that granted the order power beyond human understanding in exchange for service to something that was decidedly not divine. The knight died under questioning, but his final words were recorded by 3 separate scribes. He claimed that the Templars had found the original prison, the place where God had bound the first rebels after their fall from grace. And in their desperation for knowledge and power, they had begun the process of unlocking it. This revelation sent shockwaves through the highest levels of the church hierarchy. If true, it meant that Christianity's greatest defenders had become its greatest threat, that the very order sworn to protect the faith had made alliance with its ancient enemies. Pope Innocent IV faced an impossible choice. The Templars had grown too powerful to ignore, too dangerous to confront openly. Their network of fortresses stretched across Europe and the Holy Land. Their treasuries funded kings and emperors. Their knowledge of warfare made them nearly invincible on any battlefield. But beneath this worldly power lurked something that made even the Vicar of Christ wake in cold sweats. The Pope's private correspondence, sealed in Vatican vaults until 1978, reveals the depth of his terror. In a letter to his closest advisor, he writes of dreams where Jerusalem burns with fires that give no light, where the very stones of the Temple Mount crack and bleed. He speaks of consulting ancient texts, documents so old they predate the formal establishment of the Church, searching for guidance on how to combat an enemy that might not be entirely human. The breaking point came in 1291 with the fall of Acre, the last Crusader stronghold in the Holy Land. As the city burned and Christian defenders fell back to their ships, witnesses reported something that defied explanation. Templar knights fought not with the desperate fury of men facing death, but with an otherworldly calm, as if they knew something the rest didn't. Some claimed to see shadows moving independently of the men who cast them. Others swore they heard voices speaking in harmony with the knights' battle cries, voices that seemed to come from beneath the earth itself. Brother Marcus of Provence, a Hospitaller who survived the siege, left an account that chills the blood even today. He describes the final hours when Templar knights retreated not to the harbour like other survivors, but deeper into the city's ancient foundations. They carried with them objects wrapped in cloth that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. And as the Muslim forces pressed their final assault, these knights simply vanished. Not fled, not fallen in battle, but disappeared as completely as if the earth had swallowed them whole. When Muslim forces finally secured the lower levels of Acre, they found chambers that hadn't appeared on any Crusader maps. Rooms carved from living rock, their walls covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly, and in the centre of the largest chamber, a circular pit that seemed to descend beyond the reach of any torch. The Muslim chronicler Ibn Taymiyyah refused to describe what his men found at the bottom, writing only that some knowledge is too dangerous for human minds to contain. But the Templars' disappearance from Acre wasn't an ending. It was a relocation. Intelligence networks across Europe began reporting strange activity at Templar strongholds, convoys moving under cover of darkness, carrying cargo that required no food or water. Construction projects at remote preceptories, building chambers deep underground for purposes no one could explain, and always that same sweet metallic smell that workers had first encountered beneath Solomon's temple. King Philip of France had his own reasons for wanting the Templars destroyed. The crown owed them enormous sums, debts that threatened to bankrupt the realm. But his investigation into their activities uncovered evidence that transformed greed into genuine fear. His spies reported rituals performed at midnight in chambers that echoed with voices speaking in unison, though only one man stood at the altar. They described ceremonies where objects were passed hand to hand, objects that seemed to whisper secrets to whoever touched them. The most disturbing report came from a spy who had infiltrated the Paris temple. He claimed to witness a gathering where Templar officers consulted with figures that cast no reflections in the polished metal of their armour. These shadowy advisors spoke of preparations nearly complete, of doors standing ready to open, of an age ending and another beginning. The spy's final message, found carved into his cell wall after his mysterious death, contained just 3 words: "They are ready." Pope Clement V initially resisted King Philip's demands for action against the Templars. But when presented with evidence gathered by the Church's own investigators, his opposition crumbled. Cardinal Francesco Orsini's secret report, declassified only in 1981, details discoveries that would shake any man's faith. Hidden chambers beneath Templar churches containing artifacts that predated Christianity by millennia. Manuscripts written in scripts that seemed to change when read aloud. And most terrifying of all, detailed plans for a ceremony that would, in the Cardinal's words, invite into our world powers that God himself had seen fit to banish. The final straw came when investigators discovered the Templars' ultimate project. Hidden beneath their fortress at Paines, the Order's birthplace, construction crews had spent decades carving a perfect replica of the chamber found beneath Jerusalem. Every symbol, every measurement, every architectural detail had been recreated with obsessive precision. And at its centre sat the same circular pit, descending into darkness that no light could penetrate. But this wasn't just an archaeological curiosity. The Templars had been using this chamber for rituals that grew more elaborate and more dangerous with each passing year. Local peasants reported nights when the ground itself seemed to pulse with unnatural rhythms. Priests from nearby villages claimed their holy water would boil when brought within a mile of the fortress. And on certain nights, when the stars aligned in patterns known only to the Order's inner circle, sounds would emerge from those depths that made even hardened knights fall to their knees in terror. The papal bull, authorizing the Templars' arrest, was written in Pope Clement's own hand, sealed with wax that witnesses swore remained warm days after its creation. The charges were carefully crafted to avoid mentioning the true reason for the Order's destruction. Heresy, blasphemy, and corruption were accusations the medieval mind could understand. But how could any pope explain to his flock that their greatest protectors had been preparing to unleash hell itself upon the earth? October 13th, 1307. The date that would live in infamy began before dawn broke across France. Royal sergeants moved simultaneously against every known Templar property, following orders so secret that many commanders opened their sealed instructions only hours before the raids began. The operation's precision suggested months of planning, but also a desperate urgency that bordered on panic. At the Paris Temple, the largest Templar stronghold in France, something went wrong from the very beginning. So there you have it. The greatest military order in medieval history, destroyed not by enemy armies or political intrigue, but by their own insatiable hunger for forbidden knowledge. 9 knights who went looking for treasure beneath Solomon's temple and instead found something that should have remained buried forever. The official records speak of financial corruption and religious heresy, but the truth whispers from the shadows of history, telling a far more terrifying tale. The Templars didn't just guard pilgrims or fight for Christ. They made contact with powers that predated humanity itself, forged alliances that no mortal should ever contemplate, and came dangerously close to opening doors that God himself had sealed shut. Whether you believe in ancient evils or dismiss this as medieval superstition, one fact remains undeniable. The Vatican was so terrified of what the Templars had become that they chose to destroy the most powerful force in Christendom rather than let their secret survive. Sometimes the greatest act of faith isn't building cathedrals or converting pagans. Sometimes it's knowing when to burn everything down and start again. The Templars may be gone, but their legacy endures in the shadows. And somewhere, in chambers carved deep beneath our feet, those doors they found still wait in the darkness, sealed but never truly closed. Because some knowledge, once discovered, can never be completely forgotten.